Man, I am amazingly excited today. We have an amazing guest, Alyssa Abo, and had her on before as a panel expert. And today she is really going to be helping us understand a huge problem, not just in the United States, but globally, everywhere. Anyway, Alyssa, before I get going, just can you introduce yourself? You can do it way better than I could ever imagine. Just like a 1 to 2 minute, just let our audience know why you're here and what makes you amazing.
Oh, well, that's very nice. Thank you. And, I love the music that's the prelude to this. So you may have saw me like dancing a little bit in my chair before we started. So great to be here. Thank you so much, Michael, for having me back. I am Alyssa Abo. I am a pediatric emergency medicine physician by training. For full disclosure, I'm also a health tech nerd. So I was fortunate to be able to study engineering prior to med school. And that really put me on a path focused on technology and medicine. Throughout my career, and I was in academics for about 20 years, I was really focused on promoting innovation from within the hospital. And then more recently, over the last few years, have really pivoted to work on the industry side. So currently, I'm collaborating with a number of companies. Many of them are startups, either as a strategic advisor, board member, or fractional C-suite executive. And earlier this year, I actually became the chief medical officer of Bloom Standard, a company that I've been advising for a number of years. So I'm really excited to talk to you about them and the problems that we see with congenital heart disease. And so thank you so much.
Well, cool. Let's get started about it. And I just have a little backdrop that people can see. So tell us what's the problem that Bloom's solving? Maybe if you want to share a little bit of the backdrop in the green room. You were sharing that you had a little experience in South Korea, which is super wired, super tech. And if you want to just give us help us out to how you came on this journey. Obviously, you've been in med tech for a while, but help us understand your experience.
Okay, sure. So in 2020, I was living in South Korea. And at the time, I was simultaneously getting my MBA, which was focused on tech and innovation. And I was invited to judge a pediatric pitch competition that was virtual, that was focused on technologies that would help with COVID-19. So the pitch competition was actually called Make Your Medical Device Pitch for Kids. And it was sponsored by the National Capital Consortium for Pediatric Device Innovation and MedTech Innovator. And Bloom Standard was one of the companies that was invited to pitch. And you may not know this, but I was one of the early adopters around point of care ultrasound. So I have deep knowledge and respect for ultrasound as a discipline. And I heard Anna Marie, the CEO, the founder, share her story, which was personal about her own daughter having a congenital heart disease. And that's what prompted her to start this mission. And I reached out and I said, I love what you're doing. It's incredible. And I still believe that to be the case. But I offered to advise, and that's what I did for a number of years, and then was really honored when they asked me this year if I would assume the role of their chief medical officer.
Wow, I love that. So what is the current prevalence with this condition? That it's a congenital heart defect? And I guess I'm going to just really have a dumb question, but is this something I imagine in US they can tell at what point before birth, or is it only after birth that they can realize this with ultrasounds? And I'll stop.
Okay, so all really great questions. So what Bloom Standard has created is a self-driving robotic ultrasound that can be used to screen for congenital heart disease. So what you're showing in that picture is one of the earlier prototypes where you place the device on the baby's chest, and within 3 minutes, you are able to then have the device acquire the images that will then be used to detect whether or not the child is at risk for congenital heart disease. So there's a few different aspects to the Bloom technology. One is the hardware, the actual device. And then there's also software algorithms with embedded artificial intelligence to be able to then determine who's at risk and who is not. So that's the technology in a nutshell. What's really unique about that is coming from the ultrasound space. I have always really appreciated how challenging it was for ultrasound to be adopted because it's operator dependent. And in this situation, you're able to actually have the ultrasound working automatically, autonomously, so that you put the device down, It captures the images, and you don't need to have a user who's well-versed in ultrasound. The other piece of it is that the images that are then acquired are high-quality images that a cardiologist remotely actually could read and also weigh in on. But if that's not possible, then the device will be able to be standalone and be able to determine then who is at risk and who's not. Getting to the other part of your question, which is prevalence around congenital heart disease. Over 1 million babies are born actually every year with congenital heart disease. And so there is a global health burden due to that. And I'm just going to reference some of the stats that I've pulled for our chat. But 1 of every 100 babies is actually born with congenital heart disease. And congenital heart disease is responsible for about 10% of infant mortality. So that is, in a nutshell, the problem. And so what Bloom Standards is really trying to do is detect earlier. You are correct that in some cases, congenital heart disease is detected in utero, but that's not always the case. So in situations where infants are born and it hasn't been previously detected, then the goal here is to detect early to save lives.
Wow. So what typically, is there like a 3-part procedure on severity, like maybe first medication, all the way to, I guess, transplant, heart transplant? What typically is the standards of care once you assess and diagnose typically?
So another excellent question. So there are different types of congenital heart disease, and about 1 in 4 babies with congenital heart disease will have critical defects, which will actually require surgery or some procedure in that first year of life. Some of the congenital heart disease defects, or some of the congenital defects, let's say, that pertain to the heart, do not require surgery. And so I appreciate the question, because not everyone is in an emergent situation, but a number of babies are. And then how do you get them to access the care that they need or the surgery that they need?
But so really the problem you're solving with, where you're at, the company is really diagnosing. Right now, it's just,
Right.
I mean, babies are healthy. You wouldn't assume the child is breathing. It's, got vital signs. I mean, a pulse ox and normal. I guess maybe with other things there might, if it's that severe, maybe oxygen saturations, there might be some indication of something. But if without this technology, otherwise it would go unnoticed, correct?
Correct. I think that sums it up pretty well. And you're right. There's a physical exam, there's a pulse ox, and there may be other things when you're examining a newborn that will be also a red flag that there is an issue and there's a problem and there may be a congenital heart defect. Absolutely right. And then the question is, what do you do about that, right? Let's just take all the babies that are born in the US. It's estimated that 50% of them have murmurs. Murmurs by themselves are not an indication that there's something wrong. Many of the murmurs are benign, and some are not. So then the question is, if you have a murmur or you fail the newborn oxygen screen, like what happens then? And that's really a big question. And so once you have the diagnosis, you know what to do. But in between the actual concern that there is a problem and the actual diagnosis, there's a lot of unknowns in between. And this is something that you and I were speaking about in the green room too. Even here in the United States, it's estimated that only 10% of babies actually have access to ultrasound in the place that they're born or that they're seen for care. So if you take that, in conjunction with 70% of these patients live more than 60 miles away from the nearest pediatric heart center or congenital heart specialist, that's really problematic. Mm-hmm. And I was sharing with you, as an emergency physician, oftentimes if we were providing med control for the region, I've been very fortunate to work in large academic centers that were often the hubs for congenital heart disease. So then we would be tasked with working with the outside hospitals to determine which infants were at risk and who needed to come to us for further evaluation. And it sounds simple enough, but if you have a newborn baby and parents who just, welcome their child into the world, and you're asking them to go in an ambulance for a few hours or to come via helicopter, it's really quite stressful. And so I think in addition to providing that global screening to detect who's at risk, if we can also bring better technology to the patients and improve access to technologies, I think that's also a win. It doesn't mean that the babies won't ultimately, who are at risk, need to go to those tertiary or quaternary care centers. Absolutely. But can we do a better job of using the technology we have to take better care of patients and the place that they're born? And then you take that from the United States, that's one part of it. But then you think about the global implications and the stats that I gave you globally, those numbers really change on depending where you're born.
Mm-hmm.
And so congenital heart disease is really prevalent in certain countries and certain, even a larger cause of infant mortality. And so how can we also start to chip away at solving that problem too?
I really love this. I mean, this is just, I feel like so, I guess that I can only imagine I'm very much like anyone in the United States, just blown away with this data and that we need to do something. And so, the fact that parents, you'd think in our industrial, health, we all know U.S. is challenged with healthcare in many ways, but with, that 90%, it just, I guess your end hope is that any place that someone's being born or a child is being born, that your device will be there to have that as a standard of care someday, I guess within the next 5 years or however it be. Because right now, if children are being born, what the heck's going on right now? I mean, the amount of costs that I know in our child, she's 14, she'll be 15 soon. My gosh, that was a huge ordeal. And I'm wondering, did they have access? Would they have had? No, not yet, because that was a long time ago. But now in the future, when will they have access to your technology? I'm curious.
Yeah. Are you asking me when?
Or yeah. So I'm just like maybe your roadmap or where you're at,
Sure.
just if, your kind of your commercialization vision.
Sure. So another excellent point, and before I answer the commercialization question, you also raise a really good point about maternal care.
Mm-hmm.
So there are healthcare gaps in the United States, and we're hearing a lot about that for maternal care. And what we're seeing with respect to newborns is if there's lack of care for the mothers who are pregnant, that often translates to lack of care for the neonates who are born. And so I think closing those gaps together and working side by side with those folks who are trying to close the healthcare gaps for women is something that's very much on our radar. And I think this will get into the roadmap. The device right now, the initial use case is to screen for congenital heart disease. It's obviously a worldwide problem. And I respect that this is where the vision was to start. But certainly the technology can then scale to other parts of the body and also to adults. So to answer your question around commercialization, the device as it is right now recently received FDA breakthrough designation. So that was a huge win. And I think that's really a testament to the fact that there is really interesting ultrasound technologies that exist, but none that are really focused on this problem. And so as far as the roadmap and commercialization, it's our goal that in the next few years that this will be commercially available, and then hopefully over time will be adopted globally. And obviously here in the United States, I would love to see this across the board, but especially in community hospitals, remote areas where we know that it's even more challenging for pediatric patients to get those initial ultrasounds.
Yeah, I would love. I was at Vive and I got to interview one of the recipients of the health tech equity or something. It's two words. It's Priyank from India, and I believe his big effort was congenital heart defect, and I had no idea. He at least brought it on the awareness, and I don't know all about his organization, but he's expanded in 6 other countries. Mexico is one. And he was using, I think, WhatsApp because of the challenge in India with just the different communications, cultures to mobilize. Just it's a foundation or not for profit. So I know what I would like to talk about, if you're okay, is just some of the partners. You guys have such a long list of partners globally, some really heavy hitters. Would you be comfortable discussing a little bit about that? I know you're the chief medical officer, but when I looked at your website, it's pretty impressive, the partnerships.
Thanks. Sure. I would be happy to share a bit about that. So the company, oh, wow, look at it right there. You are well prepared, my friend. So yes, there are a number of partnerships, and what's interesting is, so I'd mentioned how I met them through the pitch competition. So just to kind of help out a little bit here, Children's National is where NCCPDI is. And that was in part one of the sponsors with MedTech Innovator for the pitch competition. The Newborn Foundation, so Anna Marie, the founder, has been involved in newborn health globally for a number of years. So a lot of amazing work done at the Newborn Foundation. And then yes, there's a lot of partners on here that have really been instrumental in helping accelerate the company and the initiatives. And then I'm happy to share that there are partnerships that are going on in Mexico, in Wales, Bolivia, India, and Mongolia. And what's really unique about this also is that some of the partnerships are with academic institutions and universities, and some of the partnerships are on a government level with the ministries of health. And I think to your point about your colleague that you interviewed in India, that a lot of countries are realizing that these issues really are ones that need to be tackled across the board. Mm-hmm. And so it's been quite, I would say, unique and special for a company like Bloom Standard to have meetings with the Ministry of Health. I think you saw recently that the team was just in Mongolia, and it's incredible. It's incredible to see the reaction, the traction, the momentum that's happening because of a quite simple device, but its impact is enormous. And even to date in the prototypes and being able to figure out how we can improve the device, it's actually already saved lives. And to me, it's a testament to what we're setting out to do and hoping to do that on an even larger scale. But when the team came back and said, "You're never going to believe it, we detected something in this child," I'm just in awe, really. I'm speechless, because you're like, wow, like that's what we're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I've been fortunate to go, never been to Mongolia, but I went on 2013 to a missions trip, church, and Inner Mongolia.
Oh,
and
wow.
It was very close. So it's up there, like northwest of Beijing. And many of the people on that missions trip there was a missions group that were housed in Mongolia. They had a thriving, I guess, orphanage in Mongolia. And I learned a little bit about the culture, and they got a lot of universities, a lot of opportunity there because they are a free society, and kind of where they're positioned next to Russia and China is very interesting. So I think that's great that you guys were able to go there. And I guess you're partnering with their academic centers. I'm sure you don't know, but so much, but anyway, that's awesome.
It's exactly what you said, and with the clinics, the academic centers, and then also the ministries of health. And you're making me think, when you're jogging my memory when you're talking about your trip to Mongolia. So when I was a resident, I actually, through a Johnson & Johnson program, went and spent some time in Grenada in the West Indies. And they're a country that historically had a lot of rheumatic heart disease, and sometimes kids would need to be sent from Grenada to nearby countries for cardiac care. And with the antibiotics and treating for rheumatic heart disease, they've been able to eradicate a lot of the sequelae of rheumatic heart fever, but still just so amazing, like what they were able to do with the technology that they had. And they really didn't have a lot. And I think about how this could translate to helping countries like Grenada. And then the other thing that, you mentioned about India and bandwidth and infrastructure. So there was a team from Children's National and the emergency department that would go out to Haiti, and we would send ultrasound devices with them. And it became very clear very quickly, like how challenging it was for them to send images back to us, for us to help them review them. And so your point about bandwidth is really an important one, because not all of the different countries that we work with have the same infrastructure. And that's in large part why it was really important for us to create a device that would be able to tell you yes or no, are you at risk for congenital heart disease or not? Because it may take some time. It may not be as feasible for a cardiologist to remotely view those images based on where you're at. And so we wanted that to not be a barrier, but rather in cases where you can do that, like that's even better, right? If we can have a pediatric cardiologist look at those images, wonderful. But in cases where that can happen, we wanted to make sure that the device could really stand on its own.
Yeah, I love what I'm hearing with the remote, and it's kind of, I don't want to say plug and play. I don't want to undermine the actual user, use and training. Of course, there needs to be some, but we haven't really challenged with providers, all the access of care. So seems like you guys are really well positioned, and I could see in 5. I know it takes forever with FDA and all the different clearings, but I think it's exciting, and I'm probably just thinking. I'm thinking out loud, but the pediatric space is such a small space because everyone wants to be in the 65 plus age tech. I mean, my gosh, all you hear all day long is about that. And pediatrics is such a small little area. So I think it sounds like your founder, your team was very wise to go global to cover a bigger and work with those international organizations. But I could see a lot of application, like with these software, the algorithms, and then the device itself, probably 25 different things that you'll be doing in the next 10 years with the technology through licensing. Would you feel comfortable speaking on any of that, or is that some of that probably is strategic, might not at this point be good to talk about publicly?
So I appreciate it, and I thank you for asking. We are quite open about that because I think, to your point, the problems that we are trying to solve for are not just unique to the heart. So yes, there, as part of our roadmap and our vision to scale, we would love to see the device used for heart and lungs, and even potentially for the neonatal brain, because you can ultrasound the brain of a neonate because you have an open fontanelle in the skull, so you're able to get beautiful ultrasound images. We think a lot about, can we do some screening for maternal health, because like we had mentioned, the maternal health care gap in the United States is one issue, and then globally it's another issue. And so many pregnant women across the globe don't have access to ultrasound throughout their pregnancy. So could there be a world in which you could have our device, scan the mom and then later on scan the baby? That is definitely something that we are thinking a lot about. So I appreciate the question. And I'll say I was really impressed that they started off in pediatrics. Mm-hmm. And you are right in a sense that there is a huge gap around technology for pediatrics. Mm-hmm. Often I hear the same argument that you mentioned, which is the market is small, but it's really not as small as you think, mm-hmm. Or that people think, and it's not really holding up as such a good excuse anymore. But it is true that there is a disconnect between what's happening in the innovation space and what actually then comes to the pediatric market. And I think there are a number of folks like myself who are really trying to bridge those gaps and figure out ways to promote more to come to benefit children. But if you think about it, kids have the most of their life left to live. And if we can intervene earlier and help set them up for success, then, maybe we help them be in a better position to have less challenges as adults. But that starts with really focusing on them as a community. And I will say what really struck me, one of the last conferences I was at, were that there were a number of ultrasound companies who were really proud of the AI technologies that they had developed. And when they were taking me around to the different machines, and I asked, so what's approved for pediatrics? And it was zero, right? And so I think what Bloom is doing is great. And I hope that, we will continue to expand in the pediatric space and then also expand into adults as well. But I do think what they're focusing on now with kids is really unique and actually really important.
And this is your expertise. I mean, this isn't just, I'm not, a lot of times you have these startups, don't mean to say anything disparaging in general, but they're trying to cut corners, save cost, and they have a lot of interim, they need that CMO, they need that doctor signature, they need that credibility. But they got the right person. I mean, this is your expertise in ultrasound, you know, I mean, so to me, this is what you've been doing in ER a long time, and then the med tech. So you were really uh, well matched for this. So I think that's, to me, really exciting, and it's really important for companies to take their time hiring right and finding the right person.
I agree. And thanks for saying that. I feel the same. I feel very fortunate that in pivoting from academics into startup world that I was able to really jump into startups that I feel really passionate about. And I believe what they're doing and I understand the technology. And in a few weeks, I actually will be invited to share my experience about going from emergency medicine to entrepreneurship, starting consulting companies, and how to actually do that. And what you just mentioned is a lot of the advice I give to both sides. You know, get physicians in early or get clinical folks in early. There are a lot of really incredible nurse innovators as well, but really get that viewpoint in early so that you are building a technology that actually solves a problem. You know, I feel like time and time again, I see companies building these incredible technologies, but they're a little bit disconnected from solving the problems that we see clinically. And I think it's really important to have those relationships built early on. And then the same is true for those folks who are looking to broaden their horizons and maybe do something more beyond academics and go from helping, you know, hundreds and thousands to hundreds of thousands and millions. And I do think that the way I entered into the space and was advising and then learning and growing with the company, that this was a natural progression. I mean, I was still quite humbled by the offer to be their chief medical officer, but it was a good fit. And I knew a lot more about the company having advised for them. And so your point is well taken. I would love to see more folks who are practicing medicine in any capacity, working more with industry to really translate the knowledge back and forth and give yourself a little bit of that trial period on both sides to make sure that it is a good fit. And then if it is, it's really quite a privilege to grow with a company and see how that evolves over time.
Yeah, I would like you to share just a little bit of the landscape, which you were getting into, the startup landscape, the MedVice. I'm thinking of one thing, the reimbursement. You talked about the solving the problem. You know, that's another thing. There's tons of problems, but there's no money in certain things. And I don't want to, you know, give a hard time about pediatrics, which is a smaller niche than the 65 plus every 12,000 members a day that join the Medicare Advantage, you know, whatever, that's just huge. But tell me about sort of your experience from advising in the med tech space, the challenges, any advice for if the founders, I would hope, be listening, or, you know, partners that might want to work with you guys, just a little bit of that landscape that you have so much wisdom and advice to give.
Sure. So I would say the way I often contribute to or try to add some value to the startups that I work with is I like to be that clinical integration layer, and I like to work horizontally across all the verticals. So what for me that means is if you have an R&D team and they're focused on building out products, like I really want to know what those products are and sort of tap into the engineering side of my brain and say, okay, how are you developing this? What does that look like? What are the indications? How can you scale this? Where is it going from here, right? So it's important for me, for the companies that I work with, to really be able to understand the technology and then be able to translate that with them either internally to the people who are working on the commercialization side, or also then translate that externally to folks who are working in the healthcare systems to say, okay, here's the technology. It might bring you value because these are the patients that you see, or these are the problems and the challenges that you have. So I would say a lot of my efforts are in building out those relationships, building the trust between the relationships, and also really starting to collaborate very, very early and make sure people are thinking not just in one lane, but actually thinking about all the things that need to happen in parallel. So to that effect, if I'm advising a company and I'm working directly, let's say with the business development team and the product team, then I also want them to ensure that they're pulling in folks early who have expertise around the FDA and the regulatory pathway and who have expertise on the reimbursement side, because there are people who are smarter than me in those spaces. And I love to surround myself with smarter people because I learn all the time. And so by doing that, I try to sort of share the holistic view of what it will take to be successful so that from the very beginning, you're thinking, okay, I don't just need a business plan, but I need a regulatory plan and I need a reimbursement plan. And how is this going to be adopted? And, you know, starting to think about all of those things early in my mind is what really sets you up for success. And so that's a lot of the way that I approach it.
Yeah, so I look at it as if almost it's like a pattern recognition for all the different things that you need in that kaleidoscope to integrate and put together. And I think coming from you, or coming from the thinking like, oh my gosh, she's an MD, she's a doctor, MBA. It seems like and then your engineering, you have a unique wiring, the way you're talking about those things. And that to me is a rare fit for that with the startup. So I guess you probably were, what's the bias? You were selecting you're not, I imagine most doctors are adverse selecting themselves out of this because there's so much nuance and gray area. And when you described it, I think you are really hard to find to not only I'm hearing more of a product engineer than a chief medical officer. I'm not hearing much compliance. I'm not hearing, so it's really fascinating when I hear about your story and how you translate. Of course, you're a doctor and an MBA, and I'll stop.
Well, thank you for the compliments. I appreciate it. I do think I am wired to think differently. I do try to, someone once asked me what my superpower, if you were a superhero, what would your power be? And I did not have a good answer to that question. And so I had to really think long and hard about it. But I do think for me, it's thinking in multiple dimensions. Like I really try to think in multiple dimensions all of the time. And I think coming from emergency medicine, especially, and I do appreciate your compliments, I will give a shout out to emergency medicine docs that they are quite innovative. I think just by virtue of working in the ER, most of us are adrenaline junkies. We are a bit, like MacGyver. So we love to problem solve and be creative. And we're always having to figure out what we need for that patient in the moment, pulling from the resources we have. So I've seen a number of emergency physicians make that leap and spend more time in innovation and building and sometimes creating their own companies. So that for sure. I think the other piece of it from my experience in startups is that no CMO is created equal. So there are definitely situations where CMOs may be more focused on the regulatory side because they have more of a regulatory background. I know for us at Bloom Standard, we are about to start some more clinical trials. So I will be actively involved in that piece and working with the clinical teams who are actually performing the trial. So that will, round out some of the other work that I'm doing there. But to your point, yes, that's the way I'm wired. And so I do really love everything from product all the way to the bedside. But there are a number of physicians that have skill sets that are really unique. And I think sometimes they may even take it for granted or not even realize that that could translate to the industry. But I would encourage those folks to at least give it a try or reach out to me, and I'm happy to have those conversations. But I do think that the more we can bring the different areas together, like the better chance we have of actually starting to push the needle forward in healthcare.
Well, I love how you described it. When you said MacGyver, I was thinking MacGyver at the same time when you said
really?
that. Yeah, it's just
That's
like
awesome.
the best way to solve something is just, it's not money. A lot of times people say it's all about money. No, like you're in the, whether you're in the ER and you got a time constraint, it's a hackathon. You're bound by time to solve. Like if you don't stop whatever and solve it. I mean, so I think I didn't even think about it. It's brilliant. Like, and then you have the engineering wiring. We got to figure it out, know?
Yeah.
So where do we go? We have a few more minutes. I don't want to hijack this wonderful conversation. I'm so glad you came on. I really appreciate it. Really respect everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Where can we kind of finish this great conversation with?
That's a great question. I would say I would encourage people to just keep talking to each other. I know that The world has changed a bit since COVID. And so we don't have as many of the water cooler conversations as we used to. But the flip side of that is I feel as the world is not as big as it used to be, right? So hopping on a call with somebody who lives on the other side of the world is just not really challenging anymore. And I think it's almost second nature. So for me, it's all about just networking and collaborating and bringing good people together. And so whoever is listening, whatever side of the equation that they're on, I would just encourage them to reach out and continue having these conversations. And it's two ways, like maybe you need help, maybe you can offer help. But if we're all thinking that way and like what we can do to make it a little bit better, then I think there's a lot of potential in those conversations.
I love that. Where are you headed to? Any conferences in the next few months? Anything in the next 6 months on your radar that you think is worth sharing with people?
Oh, so that's great. I may swing by SIM, the Informatics and Medical Imaging Conference that's happening this week in DC. So I will probably stop over there because I love imaging, and obviously I love medicine. So I'll probably swing over there, and then Innovator MD. That's where I'll be speaking about emergency medicine to entrepreneurship, and that's happening virtually over the summer in July. So that's another good conference to check out, especially for the MDs that might be listening. And then we'll have to see what the fall brings. But I will say for the pediatricians who might be listening, the American Academy of Pediatrics, I was just recently elected to the executive board on section for advanced technology and therapeutics. And so we're really trying to do more. And actually, we're having a webinar this week around AI and pediatrics. So I would just say, like, whatever your passion is, try to look to see also where those companies might be also trying to expand, because I think everyone's trying to keep up and it's really hard and we're all learning as we go. But that's where I'll be over the next few months.
Cool. I'm glad I asked that question. And all this, everyone, is unscripted. We did sort of say we're going to talk a little bit about congenital heart defect, but she didn't have any idea I was going to ask her some career and more about her personal stuff. And then the other thing is, what do you find when you have a good conference? Like, what makes it good to you? Like a takeaway from you?
So always the people. I when I get to actually go to a conference, it's even better. But even the networking for the virtual conferences has just been great. I think the conferences that I tend to go to now are they appeal to a lot of like-minded folks. So that's just always fun to build out those networks. And then the products, right? Like the technology is amazing. And maybe I'll leave you with this, that my view really is that technology can be the great equalizer. And there are a lot of challenges around it. And that is not lost on me for sure. And that could be a whole other conversation we have, like why it's so challenging. But at the end of the day, if done correctly, I really believe that technology can be the way that we can move forward and provide better healthcare for all of us around the globe. So that always inspires me. That always gets me excited if I see some new cool tech that I've never seen before. So people and products.
Yeah. So the last question, where are you in 7 years? If
my gosh.
Yeah.
Hopefully doing good things with good people. But what that looks like, I think is going to be to be determined. 7 years in a startup is a long time. So I think in 7 years, hopefully Bloom will just go big, and hopefully I'll still be a part of that in some capacity. But as far as other things that I'm doing, I'm exploring now just different ways that someone like me can have an impact. So I'll have to get back to you on that.
You're very smart. You've been trained, PR trained, but do you ever see yourself like at a VC firm? I'm sure you've been advised informally or formally with the way you kind of see the dot connecting, all that. Of course you're number one Bloom, but where do you see yourself if in 7 years potentially?
So yes, VC is on the radar. I don't know if someone I talked to, put you in as a plant to get me to disclose how I feel about VC publicly, but for me, VC is a way that I think I can actually leverage a lot of my skill sets, bring value. It satisfies the adrenaline junkie part of me that gets to work with a lot of companies. As you know, I mentioned I sit on boards. And so oftentimes when VCs invest, there are opportunities to be a board investor or board observer or a board member. And so there is a lot of potential there. And I think I used to think about VC as the long game. But now the more I think about it, VC is probably short to mid game. So yes, it's very possible in 7 years that you will find me in VC, and we have not had that conversation. So it's very astute of you to probably realize something about me that I took me a little bit of time to come to. So,
well, I just see, I've been in talent acquisition space, and I see, the hardest thing to find, you usually find the leader emerges that because of the need, not that they wanted to be a leader or the role or however. To me, that's what, I'm just kind of putting, the different pieces together, whether I'm, but anyway, and then what that means is totally different. I mean, there's so many different VCs. I mean, we've heard the nasty vulture VCs to the operator, the prior founder. So it's just, and I've learned so much by having amazing guests on the show, panels. I've done a few, and I learned a lot the last 2 VC shows. One I'm going to get ready to hopefully by the end of the day or however get my newsletter follow up from the good and the bad of venture capital 2.0. And one of the and I'm sorry I'm inserting at the very end, but one of the biggest takeaways from the last one was we would not have been alive without VC. And basically, it was Teladoc, the founder, Michael Gordon, sharing. He put Teladoc or telehealth on the map, and then there was all these copycats, and they needed VC capital to take it further ahead. So that was just one amazing incident that he shared succinctly about why the value. I mean, there's also, So anyway, I love this conversation, and I need to finish it with you and not me talking. So. Send us off today, Alyssa.
Send us off. Well, I think these are exciting times all around. And I think people like you who are exposing what people like me are doing is very much appreciated, because we're always learning and learning in all ways. So I will leave you that, as I am trying to always be learning and learning in all ways. And so with that, I thank you very, very much for having me. And I look forward to connecting again with you in the near future.
Absolutely. Likewise. It's been awesome. So great to have you on.